All right, everybody. Welcome once again to Irish Sports Daily's YouTube Live here with Greg Flamong and, of course, the Yama, Jamie Ueyama. We're going to talk some Irish football. We're also going to talk some recruiting in another segment. There'll be two segments today, so be looking for that. But today, the first topic we're going to talk about, of course, is this conference stuff that's going on. And, there's a lot of stuff that has been said. There's been a lot of articles written. We've discussed it on Power Hour. We've discussed it on the boards. There really hasn't been a whole lot of new news, and I don't think that that's surprising at this point because I think a lot of the teams that are trying to move, i.e. Notre Dame or say a Miami to the SEC or a Clemson or an FSU, they got to figure out how they can make that happen at first. And so I think that that's going to be a big part of it, and it's going to take some time. So I think anybody expecting really fast movement on this will probably be a little bit disappointed. I don't anticipate something happening, within the next 24 hours, but it certainly could. It just depends. But so much of it's going to depend on, can you get out of your contracts? What makes the most sense? That type of thing. But I think the thing that stands out the most about this, and there were a couple articles written here the last couple days, guys. One from Dan Wetzel that I thought was really interesting, and it was I posted it on irishsportsdaily.com, and it kind of reminded everybody that this whole thing started when they tried to go to a 12-team kind of playoff system, and it seemed like initially a lot of teams were excited about that, and the conferences themselves were excited about that. But as time went on, then we got some people saying, you know what, I don't know if that's a good idea. And, the ACC kind of seemed to almost, maneuver to kind of block that because they felt like, if they could block that, maybe they could force Notre Dame into the conference. Because ultimately, there's a lot of games to be played here. And everybody knows Notre Dame is kind of the prize that's left standing at this point. And so there's a lot of back and forth on what is the best way to kind of pull Notre Dame in, whether it be the Big Ten, the ACC, the SEC, all those types of things. And so I think that this was kind of a strategic move, if I had to guess, that these teams were trying to say, let's see if we can kind of force Notre Dame's hand by not giving them the opportunity. Because if there is a 12-team opportunity, then Notre Dame really has no incentive at all to join any conference at any time because they'll always have a path to the playoff. And that gives Notre Dame, no reason to really bounce other than the money. And so we're going to talk about the money here in a minute, but I thought it was interesting and a very interesting angle that he brought up. And now I'm wondering if, the ACC and the Big 12 are kind of kicking themselves because now both of their conferences plus the Pac-12 are now in, peril. And there's a chance that all three could fold, and a lot of those teams could be completely shut out if they do go to super conference types of situation. So let's just take that into consideration. Let's just say that maybe the SEC, and again, there was another article written yesterday, I can't remember who it was, did a really good job of saying, look, the SEC, it's in their best interest to not.
Pete Thamel.
Was it Thamel? Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So it was in SEC's best interest for Notre Dame not to join a conference because if they do join one, everybody anticipates it will be the Big Ten, and that will make their conference much stronger. Not stronger than the SEC, but certainly a viable competitor when it comes to TV rights and money and all that type of stuff. So to me, I think that's an interesting angle. But let's just say that maybe the SEC and the ACC and some of these other schools or conferences get together and say, you know what, maybe we ought to reconsider this 12-team playoff thing. That way the SC or the ACC doesn't get blown up. That way, we can kind of protect some of these other schools, maybe the Big 12 and the Pac-12, the remaining teams there can kind of come together and we can kind of protect what we have here and we don't help strengthen the Big Ten. I could see that being a possible scenario of what would be happening behind the scenes. Let's start with you, Greg. What do you think of that theory?
So you're talking about the theory of going back to the 12-team playoff thing, right?
Because
To
yeah, that would
to save
solve a lot of
just
this. I think Notre Dame would strongly consider standing pat at that point. But we'll have to talk about the TV money, which we will here shortly.
right. I think they would. I think it would encourage Notre Dame to stand pat, and that's obviously Notre Dame's. That's their end goal, right? Or that's their preferred outcome. I think that's Notre Dame's preferred outcome, and I think that's the fan base's preferred outcome. The thing that you have to, I guess, consider too is what's going to happen with the rest of the Pac-12 now? Because once SC and UCLA are out, like the Pac-12 is no longer viable as a conference, right? And there's a lot of things being written, like even today, about the Big 12 and the ACC are talking about forming some kind of alliance. The Big 12 is in discussions with the Pac-12 and pulling some of those teams in. So so that would create basically four major conferences, which would like some type of Big 12, Pac-12 hybrid. And then you would have the ACC, and then you would have the Big 10 and the SEC. The other elephant in the room here is that like Miami and Clemson and Florida State, like they are going to get lured in probably by the SEC. So like you could have movement on a 12-team playoff, sure, but how does that work within the structure then of these new conferences that are being created, right? Like who is even making that decision, right? Like if Miami leaves and Florida State leaves and Clemson leaves, well then what ACC body is then making the decision to be like, okay, like the ACC is a part of a 12-team playoff and they're going to be included. Like, how does that even work? They don't have any standing to call shots at that point when their conference is falling apart. And the same thing with the Pac-12, right? So in theory, yeah, like bring back the 12-team playoff, and that, if that could save Notre Dame's independence, but I feel like the wheels are so far in motion now that things are going to drop. Like there's going to be more movement, and so like beyond, like, so until we see what that movement is, I don't know how viable a 12-team playoff is. Like, how would that even be voted on right now? I guess is the question that I would have.
Well, again, this would have to be something that the athletic directors would have to vote on, and it would be part of an NCAA type of arrangement for sure. I think the thing that, for me, I think the thing that stands out the most is I'm sure that everybody else is looking at the situation and saying the Big Ten could get a lot stronger if they add Oregon, they add Washington, and they add Notre Dame. And, those are three very viable situations to happen. And if I'm the SEC, you have to also look at the situation and say, how much better can we get? Does Miami move the needle? Does Florida State move the needle? Does Oklahoma State move the needle for us? Does it make sense adding those programs to the SEC? And, if I'm Sankey, Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, I'm thinking to myself, does it make sense for us to even expand if we don't have to? Because, will these teams actually bring something? Sure, Miami looks to be like a team rebounding right now with a brand new coach and that type of thing, but you don't know that. Miami's looked like they're going to rebound before. And they've always had the talent, and they just can't seem to put it together. Same thing with Florida State. You don't know what's going to happen there. Clemson, if you could pull them in, maybe that makes sense. But I think the other thing that people need to understand is, with the grant of rights situation, that 2036 is a very long number when you talk about the ACC and how this works. And it's my understanding that, even if Notre Dame were to pull out and there are two options. You can pay the buyout, or if you pull out, you still have to give your media rights to the ACC, which means you have to give up your money. So there would have to be a legal battle there somehow for Notre Dame to get out of that. Now, I don't know how that would happen, if it would happen. But I found it interesting. We talked about it on Power Hour. It's only a 2-page document, which to me leaves a whole lot of room for interpretation and a whole lot of wiggle room. I would assume if there's not a lot of clauses and a lot of things that can challenge somebody's ability to get out of the contract, then there's a lot of things that could be discussed and argued in court and that type of thing. And as I've said before, the thing I think that stands out the most is it all depends on what everybody in the ACC wants to do. If everybody wants to get out and you're, say, Duke, does it make sense for you to spend a whole lot of time and legal money trying to fight something that's inevitable, or does it make much more sense for you to spend your time and money trying to figure out a solution to this problem? And I think that that's where it's going to be. And right now, it really depends on where the ACC conference is, the power players, what Clemson wants to do, what Miami wants to do, what Florida State wants to do, and what their options are. Would the SEC even take them at this point? We don't know. So I think it's an interesting debate. But I think if you're going to suck Notre Dame back into the independents and not having any move, this 12-team playoff would be the way to do it. What are your thoughts, Jamie?
I just don't see any way this 12-team playoff can go. I just think it's like kind of what Greg said. The wheels are too far in motion now. Like I just think when you look at, you mentioned that the 2036 kind of rights, like the ACC is doomed. That contract doomed the ACC because, while all these things are being renegotiated, and the Big Ten rights are coming up, and that was one of the reasons why they wanted to add USC and UCLA to add to their value there. And the ACC, the only thing that can open up the deal for them is if Notre Dame becomes a member. Well, Notre Dame has zero incentive to become, like, less than ever to become a member right now. So, and even if the ACC were to say, okay, well, we're going to try to do some deal with the Pac-12 or add some teams from the Pac-12, that doesn't even move the needle for in terms of what it would mean to open up a new contract, right? And the way that I look at it, and I don't know if the SEC, I would imagine the SEC is totally fine standing pat with what they have right now. Like, they have more than enough big time teams. They don't need Clemson, Miami, Florida State, whoever, right? They don't need them. And I don't think, but if I was Clemson, Miami, Florida State, North Carolina, whoever, I'd be begging the SEC to take me right now, because I think there's a lot of programs that are probably worried that they're going to get left out, right? There's going to be 2 big super conferences and they're going to get left out. So, like, I can't even imagine what it feels like to be like a Virginia fan right now or whatever. And you're thinking, like, I hope like the Big Ten takes us or this or that. Like, I have some friends who cover Cal football, and it's not like, obviously Cal football isn't a big deal. Notre Dame's playing Cal this year. The fact that Cal is taking a game with Notre Dame and it's not like a home and home, that kind of says what's going on with Cal football. And like, they're just like in total limbo right now. Like they could be not playing big time football ever again. They could be Mountain West members in soon. So I think all of these teams, because of the fear of getting locked out of the main deal, I think that's what is probably going to end up driving this. And even if they were working on a 12-team thing, they have to be looking on like having one foot out the door, because they just don't want to be caught. Like, so imagine if the SEC says, well, we're only going to take 2. So they take Clemson and Miami. Then you're Florida State. You're like, well, what are we going to do? Right? Because it's not like the Big Ten is going to be like, yeah, Florida State. Like, so all of these ADs, presidents, whatever, they got to be sweating right now. And I just think that's what's going on, is that this is like the catalyst. The fact that even Notre Dame is even the discussion is really like kind of far into like where we're going, but it's a real possibility of the Big Ten. That to me says it all.
I think that the real thing that that I think has to happen, and this is why I think it's going to be difficult for Notre Dame just to say, okay, all right, ACC, if you're not going to help us, improve our TV revenue, we're just going to bounce, okay? And you can say that all you want, but if you have essentially 11 charter members fighting against one school in a legal battle, that's going to be a lot more difficult for Notre Dame to get out of. And who's going to pay that buyout? Does it make sense for Notre Dame to pay a really big buyout to get out to join to the Big Ten? Where it would make sense, though, is if I'm Swarbrick, I got to convince Florida State, Miami, Clemson that they need to be looking at better avenues, because you need the power brokers to also be pushing to dissolve the ACC. And then it's the other teams that are going to be fighting that, meaning, as you mentioned, Virginia Tech, Pitt, all these teams are going to be like, oh, no, you're not doing this. No, you're not leaving us high and dry for somewhere else. We're going to sue you, which is what they'll try and do. But if all the power brokers say, I want out of this, then you've got a real legal battle on your hand. But if it's just one team, meaning Notre Dame, it's going to be a lot harder for Notre Dame to get out of it. So that, I think, is going to be the push-pull of this, and how quickly Notre Dame can maneuver if they want to maneuver, and how quickly something could happen in this. And that is where I don't know if we know the situation, because as we talked about, we're not sure the SEC even wants Miami or Clemson or Florida State at this point. And so I think that is kind of the push-pull of what needs to happen here if Notre Dame gets out. And, they may be stuck in this. It's, as you mentioned, the contract is what has become really difficult to get out of because of the term of it. So there's really only kind of a couple choices here, as I see it, for the ACC, and that would be somehow pull Notre Dame in, and the only way to do that is by offering more money. So maybe the ACC could go back to ESPN and say, hey, Notre Dame has agreed to do this. We're going to pull in a couple more schools, which makes our TV contract even more powerful. We want to renegotiate. And then maybe the ESPN looks at that and says, okay, that makes sense. Let's do that. But if that doesn't happen, you're kind of stuck with each other if you're Notre Dame, because how do you get out other than playing the buyout? There's certainly some legal, things that you can do, and I'm sure they're going to push to try and get that done. But I'm just not sure they have as easy an out as a lot of people think they do. They can just pull up stakes. And so that, I think, is going to be the interesting part about it. Now, let's just say there are two super conferences, and that's where we're headed. What do you think is the ideal number for those conferences? Is it 18 teams? Is it 20? Is it 24? If you look at, because part of it is TV market, because the more eyes you can get, the more valuable you're going to be to these TV markets, and the more money you're going to be able to get from ESPN or Fox or whoever it is, Amazon. So that's one part of it. But also, do you bring in a Cal or a Stanford? Because sure, you may get a San Francisco market, but does anybody out in San Francisco care about Cal or San Francisco or Stanford football? But judging by their attendance, I'd say no. So what do you think? Let's start with you, Greg. What do you think is the ideal number here?
Geez. So you're looking at 18, 20, 24, right? How does that even work schedule wise, right? Like you're not, obviously, are you going to move to like a 10, 11 game conference schedule, right? Like how many out of conference games are there going to be? It's just a weird, like, how would that even work? To me, it's like the less, the better. That's just my opinion, right? Like you don't want, to me, you don't want 24, just because you're talking about like, a 12 game regular season schedule. That's 12 teams. Like you're just not gonna play. You're gonna like, it's almost like you wouldn't even be in a conference. Like let's just say it's the Big Ten, right? With 24 teams, you obviously would break it up into divisions, right? So you'd be 12 and 12. It's like their own separate conferences. Like it's almost like the Big Ten, and then you would have two separate conferences like within those super conferences, right? So, and I assume the same thing would happen in the SEC as well. So, or it wouldn't even be called the SEC at that point. It'd be called something else. So it was like you would essentially, what I think would happen. I mean, honestly, maybe 24 is the best then. Now that I'm thinking about this, because you get 24 into one big conference, like let's say like the NFL, right, where you have the AFC and the NFC. You take 12 from there, or you take 24, and then you get 12 in a region on one side of the country, and then you get another 12 on another side of the country, and you call it the, I don't know, the Eastern NFC or whatever, right, in the Western NFC, and then you do it on the other end too. So that's what I would say. If you're going to blow it up, if it's going to be two major conferences, then go 24, do 12 and 12, right? And so then it's essentially a four conference. Like in essence, it's a 4 conference situation. Like that's what I would say. Do 24.
What do you think, Jamie?
I don't think 24 is too big a number for me. I just, because I think what Greg's saying in terms of the scheduling and stuff, like I get that part of it, but like 18 to 20 makes a lot more sense, because if you look at the remaining other 3 Power Fives, like who in the Big 12 does the Big 10 or the SEC want to poach?
Yeah,
no one, right? So Pac-12, Washington, Oregon, maybe Stanford, right? Obviously Stanford, part of it is like you said, Mike, it's not for the media market. It's more of the prestige of the university and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that they had fairly recently been really competitive in football. But outside of that, Arizona and Arizona State, that's not pushing the needle for anyone.
No,
so that's right. And
I'll say Stanford does. They do well in other sports, though. I mean, they are very competitive in other sports, and so that I think makes them somewhat attractive as well.
Yeah, it brings value for sure. And then I think, then if you go the ACC, it's Miami, Clemson, Florida State, Virginia, North Carolina. Everybody else is like a maybe at best.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say that's like 8 teams right there, right? And then you throw in Notre Dame. First of all, you don't need to take all of those 9 teams to add into what they already have there. But even if you did, like that's still like a low number. Like you're not gonna. I just can't see them, because if it's about TV contracts and adding value to those TV contracts, how many of these, like, do any of those, other than maybe even Clemson, right? Do any of those really add that much value to the TV?
Yeah.
Really, the only program right now that does really is Notre Dame, which is why everyone's talking about Notre Dame. So, it's almost like why the Big Ten isn't like rushing to add like Washington and Oregon, because they can just wait for Notre Dame and maybe just add one or 2 or 3, right? Like they can do that. So I just don't see that number getting that much bigger, which is, unfortunate, because I think there's going to be some, like at least a handful of pretty good schools that are just going to get left out.
Go ahead, Greg.
So Jamie, in this scenario, then, so with the 18, right? Let's say the 2 super conferences are 18, right? In that scenario, then is there some sort of like hybrid ACC and like hybrid Big 12, Pac-12 still exist then? Is that still in play?
My guess is it's probably going to be like a similar NFL model, where you're going to have a division of teams, right, and those are who you're going to play, or like how the AC kind of is going to structure their thing with the 3-3-5, whatever, right? Where they're going to have those 3 traditional rivals. I don't know what the number of traditional rivals or whatever that they're going to have every year, but they'll have that number, and then they'll rotate the other teams through that are in the conference. And I think that's kind of like the only way they're going to do it. Where in the NFL, you play your division to each team twice, and then you basically rotate these other, like, the NFC South plays the AFC West this year, right? that. So I think it's going to be something like that. I kind of think that's like the only way that they're going to be able to do it is because it's just too big to kind of just like the way they're doing it now, where they like don't release the schedule and a lot of it is kind of a mishmash. I just can't see that happening.
So what happens to like Virginia then?
I think Virginia is like gotta hope that they get in the Big Ten, or I mean, maybe the SEC, but I would assume.
See, that's why. That's why I think 24 teams, because they have to go somewhere. That's why
I think
they don't. The thing is, I don't think they have to. That's the thing. It's like the Big Ten could actually be like, we don't need them.
So here's my thoughts on this, and I'm just going to give it. I've been thinking about this, and this is just kind of the way I guess look at this, and it is, if I'm the people in this conference, or these two super conferences, what these people are trying to accomplish, in my opinion, is let's get the very best teams together so we can pool our collective resources to generate the most money, right? And we also want to be part of the most competitive situation that there is. And to do that, there's a certain number there, and then what is that value? And I am of the theory that you will see the playoff expand even once we get to these super conferences. And I'll tell you why. It's fun. It is fun, just like watching the NCAA basketball tournament. Anybody has a chance at that point. And so, but the key is you want to make sure that you have a chance to get into that playoff, because I think you can make even more money in the playoff than you could with all these bowls. Now, they'll still have bowl games and things like that, but say you expand that to 8 teams, the idea is to make sure if you go 8 teams that a good 6 or 7 of those 8 teams are coming from these super conferences. Maybe there's a carve out for an opportunity like Cincinnati last year. Somebody who looks really good in one of these lesser conferences could get into it. But the whole idea is we want, at least 4 of our guys on our side to get into the playoffs so we have a chance to win it and still make a lot of money. Same thing with, the Big Ten, if they wanted to be, so those teams are going to be trying to, maximize their power. And so I really think we'll see, and once you have all those teams together in 2 super conferences, nobody else's vote really matters, because that's what's going to be driving the bus. And that's what's going to be driving the TV money and that type of thing. It almost seems like it's going to fracture into 2 separate, situations in the NCAA where you have the have and the have-nots. And to me, does it matter? I mean, the thing that people don't realize is the NCAA is an elective thing. I mean, you elect to be a part of it. So what's to say that these 2 super conferences, if they don't get their way, says, okay, bye. We'll see you later, NCAA. We're going to create our own NCAA to govern our own thing, and we're going to create our own playoff. And we don't care about Arizona State. They can have their own thing. It's elective. You don't have to belong. Everybody belongs because, they want to control the cheating and make sure it's fair and that type of thing. But you could easily create a brand new NCAA that just governs these 2 super conferences, and you essentially will then have your levels of what essentially is minor league sports, because that's where we're at anyway with NIL and transfer portal and all this kind of thing. So it would not surprise me if all of a sudden those teams, once we figure out who are in these 2 super conferences, then decide to play the real power play, which is we're going to create we're going to create this new playoff system. Yeah, we'll consider you, but if you don't give us the terms we like, then we're not even going to consider you. We're going to branch off and do this. I mean, they've already talked about we're going to have a completely separate situation for football than everywhere else. I mean, that's already been bandied about, where people have said, whatever the rules are in football, or whatever the rules are, we're going to create something different for football. And so to me, I could totally see that happening. Am I crazy? What do you guys think? No? Yes? Crazy?
Jamie.
Oh, sorry. I thought Greg was jumping in there. Um, I don't know. You know
There's
what?
so much to talk about. Yes.
Well, no, I really, I think the part with about the NCAA thing going away, I think that's inevitable now. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's just been the process, you know. And I was just actually sorry, Mike, because I was thinking about how the governing the part about the cheating thing, and I was like thinking about that in my head, and I don't know how that would work, but I mean, let's be honest. They're doing a terrible job at policing that stuff
But
right
that's
now.
exactly what I'm saying. It's pointless
Yeah.
anyway.
So I just don't like. I think it's been going that way, and I think what will probably happen is they'll end up kind of hiring some kind of like commissioner and getting some kind of governing body on their own, and that'll be that's the way they'll kind of do it. And I mean, whether or not that's like Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, or Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, right? Like if those guys, one of those guys becomes like leader, or they're like joint leaders or something. But like I just kind of think that that's the way it's going to go. You don't need the NCAA, and especially if you're going to ice out these other teams. Like, I mean, what would be the point of trying to get these other teams competing if they're not competing at the same level, and if they're essentially playing like a different sport, right?
Yeah, it
Because
is.
of how
It's going to be levels of tiers of minor leagues. That's exactly what the
yes,
way I see this unfolding. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jamie. Like, there's so much, like, we're not even like thinking about like minor leagues, like you said, like what, like it's basically relegation. Like they're like some of these schools are going to be relegated, like you see in soccer, right, in Europe,
The
and
Premier League
so
and then everything else. Yes.
right,
Yeah.
right. So it's like that is down the line. The NCAA probably doesn't even have any interest even in governing it. Like they don't, like right now, it's not that they're doing a bad job. It's like they're not doing the job at all, in my opinion. Like they don't care to do it, right? Like they sit around and they do some things obviously, but like with the major players in college sports, like we see them, they're launching these inquiries about NIL. Like, give me a break. All right. Like, what are you going to do in 8 years? You're going to come up with some ruling? Like, come on. Like, that's obviously not what's going on. They're begging these schools, basically, in my opinion, to form their own commission or their own governing body and to do that. So, yeah, I agree with you guys. Like, that's where I see it going.
All right, folks, that's going to be it for this version of YouTube Live. We're going to shut down and start up again because we're going to talk recruiting. We want to make that a separate, video. So just go back to the YouTube Live if you're watching live, and or go back to the Irish Sports Daily YouTube channel, and we're going to start a brand new video here. We're going to talk some recruiting. Be back here in a little bit.